Can everyone hear me okay? People have been telling me that it's my sound all right. Shall we make a start then? Yep. Okay. So welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on this consultation. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kristen Mitchell, and I'm in the MRC CSO Public Health Sciences Unit, and I'm the engagement lead for the Institute of Health and Wellbeing. I'm going to hand over in a second to Elise, who's going to take us through the consultation. Before I do that, I just wanted to acknowledge that this is like a really hard time to be talking about well-being. You know, we have the devastating invasion of Ukraine is weighing on us all. There's concerns about rising cost of living on the back of 2 years of the stress and upheaval of COVID, and lots of us have gone for 2 years without having any kind of in-person normal everyday chats with our colleagues. So it's been a difficult time, and I know at the moment there's a lot of staff currently making big personal sacrifices to protest against the erosion of our pensions and the ongoing precarity and insecurity of our working contracts. So you know, I think it would be natural for there to be a little bit of cynicism around an invite from our employer asking to a consultation on workplace well-being. So that being the case, I just wanted to thank you for turning up and being willing to contribute. I do think this strategy comes from a place of a genuine desire to make the university as good a place to work as we can make it, within the bounds of, you know, what we can do and what we can control. And I think that's quite important at a time when so much of what's going on close to us and far away feels quite out of control. So thank you again for making the time to come to this meeting. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Elise, who's our Deputy Director for HR and who is very much leading the process of putting together this strategy. Thanks, Elise.
Thanks, Kirsten. And I'm going to share my screen and some slides, so hopefully that will work nicely and not be a detrimental impact to my well-being. Hopefully you can see that. So I guess I would just like to say thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate you showing up and welcoming me to the conversation. This is a consultation, so I will ask you to engage, and we will be using Menti for that purposes. Now, for some of you, Menti might be quite familiar, and for others less so. If you're not that familiar with Menti, on your device, if you go to menti.com, it will ask you to input a code, and it's as simple as that. And that's the code there at the top, 48394121. Kirsten, I don't know if you'd kindly be able to drop that into the chat just in case people don't pick that up as we go. One thing I will say about Menti before we get started is it's been really helpful for us in accurately capturing the feedback that we've been given. So that's really helpful as part of the consultation process. But I do appreciate that not everybody likes to react in the moment, and some people might want to reflect or find it easier to engage in a different way. So if you're not able to offer all of the feedback you'd like through this process today, or you have some later reflections, please do drop myself or Kirsten an email or engage with us in whichever way suits you. We'd be delighted to hear you, what you've got to say. Okay, so Kirsten has set the context for this really carefully, and I really appreciate that, because it would be really easy to be cynical about a presentation from HR about wellbeing when things are pretty tough out there. That said, I hope you'll take this as a genuine attempt to do something positive. And whilst we can't, with this strategy or strategic initiatives, solve the wider context issues that we're all operating in, or indeed some of the more local financial issues, I think we can do something, and we can do something positive. So hopefully you can engage with it on that basis today. The World Changers Together strategy and the People OD strategy launched last year and the year before quite clearly talk about colleague wellbeing as a core part of the strategy going forward. And I think there's been recognition that we've done a lot, or had a lot of conversation about student wellbeing, and in particular mental health, over the last 5 years or more. Kind of my personal aspiration in this was that we begun to make a shift in colleague wellbeing that was kind of similarly significant. So the strategic aspect is set out the strategy, and that we aspire to create an excellent colleague experience by embedding wellbeing as an integral part of what we do, which will enable and strengthen our community of world changers. So on the basis of that, around this time last year, I was asked to lead a working group, which Kirsten kindly agreed to join, with some colleagues from around the organisation who had either a research interest in areas of wellbeing, or just a personal interest in wellbeing, or were delivering some wellbeing services. And that working group came together to develop the strategy. So it's been developed in that sense by a group of colleagues, and we've had a lot of debate, as you can imagine, and we've been through lots of issues and discussed a lot of things. One of the things we started with was, so if that's our strategic ambition, so we're looking to integrate wellbeing into what we do, and we want it to be quite a holistic approach, or a holistic offer. So with that in mind, we've come up with kind of 3 pillars around the strategy. And the first is that wellbeing is central through COVID-19 recovery. You know, I remember 2 years ago, almost to the day, having conversations about how we will manage through this new thing called COVID, and this new pandemic that we then realised would escalate to become a pandemic. And actually, at that point, we really did think about health and safety and about wellbeing. And wellbeing was very much central through all of the considerations we had, and I'd want that to continue going forward. The second pillar is around an excellent colleague wellbeing offer, and by that we mean the sorts of offers and services that colleagues can access through the university or as an employee that are related to wellbeing, either directly or, you know, less directly related to wellbeing. And I think that's a fairly obvious and tangible thing. We benchmarked our offer right at the beginning and thought, actually, it's pretty comprehensive, but there are issues with engaging with it, and there's issues with take up. And we also considered whether or not we wanted to have a very narrow offer or what. And when and on consideration of some of the evidence and some of the research material, the 5 ways of wellbeing resonated for us. So this approach is kind of built around that 5 ways of wellbeing. And then the third, which is I think is the most significantly challenging one going forward, is that wellbeing is central to our colleague experience. Now, at the moment, I don't think wellbeing is central to our colleague experience, but that's a strategic aspiration, and we would like to see work over the rest of the strategy period and beyond to make that a reality. So we started by talking about what wellbeing would feel like and what wellbeing means to us. So we did some initial consultation with groups of colleagues, and these words came out really clearly: respect, flexibility, balance, trust and support. They came out immediately and time again. And actually that was quite easy to get to what we wanted this to feel like. And so with that in mind, we talked about how do we describe what we think wellbeing is about for us at the University of Glasgow? So what underpins the strategy? And we came up with these statement phrases, so 4 phrases that we think describe what this is about. So the first is that our people are what makes Glasgow the world-changing university, and that's why you are our priority. Wellbeing at work is about feeling balanced, respected, trusted and supported. We're each empowered and responsible for our own wellbeing, but should also expect to be supported within the university community. And essentially, wellbeing is an integral part not just of what we do, but how we do it. So hopefully you've managed to get onto Menti. And what I'd really like to hear from you now is which of these articulate what you think wellbeing means to the university. So this is about which of these resonate for you and you think, yeah, that's right, that's what should underpin our strategy. Now you can select all of them or none of them or some of them. So I'm keen to understand which ones you think articulate what wellbeing means to the university. Okay, now we've got quite a lot of people on the call, And I will give a few minutes for colleagues to input their feedback, because I'm really keen to hear from you. If I move on before you've had a chance to kind of input what you want to say, it will stay open. It won't. It doesn't close just when I move on to the next slide. So it's always tricky to get the balance between giving people enough time to comment or to input their experience, and not all kind of hanging around watching some bar charts moving. But interesting. Interesting. You guys are pretty much absolutely on trend with what we've seen through the rest of the consultation. That the one about how we think wellbeing at work feels, or we would want it to feel, it seems to be, fairly strongly resonates around the balance of empowerment and responsibility, and about wellbeing being integral. We've seen general support for those, but with a little more how, explain it to me, show me, and this branding around world changers isn't quite landing for colleagues, so I think we will change that in the strategy launch. Okay, interesting. Let's give it another minute or two. Okay, thank you. I'll keep moving, but as I say, it stays open, so feel free to keep clicking. And super, some of you are ahead of me. So what we were keen to do was to share further about what resonated and why. Yeah, this point about balance, we've had a lot of debate about balance, and we've also had a lot of debate about what's the appropriate balance of the strategy between, we are all whole selves, both at work and at home. So what's right there? Okay. Sorry to hear that someone thinks none of it seems sincere. Or the reality at the moment. I guess my question to that is, should we do nothing? Okay, diversity and belonging is absolutely key factors, that's correct. And of course, this would sit alongside all of the other strategic initiatives, particularly around quality and diversity. And I think we are also scheduled to talk to your College Athena Swan group, so keen to hear what they've got to say. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that point about the first one being around the brand statement around world changers hasn't really resonated for colleagues. That's fine. I think we need to come up with a better way of articulating why this is something that the organisation is interested in. Okay. I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen, so Kirsten, if there's anything particular in there, please do call out. Okay. Okay, I'll keep moving.
Yes, there's a quick request for people to mute if they've got background noise. Oh, somebody was asking actually, was the question about so I think, is that a question about whether the open text box comes up? So that comes up after you've submitted the your multiple choice answers. I don't know if that's been sorted.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, Donna, you'd already replied to them.
Thank you. I'll keep moving, and you can let me know if there's anything in particular.
Yeah, I think we've all resolved.
Okay, so moving on, this is the wellbeing wheel. So for those of you who didn't like the points about branding and whatnot earlier, I suspect this won't appeal particularly to you, but what we were trying to achieve with this was a diagram or a picture that could describe what we were talking about. So you'll obviously recognise the 5 ways of wellbeing in the outer rim of the circle, and then inside you see the various different themes under which we offer services or resources to colleagues. So we wanted something that could become recognisable as a kind of, oh yeah, that's the wellbeing stuff, I can go there for that, but that also articulated our approach in a picture if we could. Okay, in terms of our health and wellbeing offer, this is what we already have. So we already have a fairly comprehensive offer that benchmarks strongly against other sectors actually, and in the UK and otherwise, and also in particular within the sector. It's quite common, so there's a fair amount there for people already, but we are aware that it's not always that easy to find and that there's not particularly strong engagement with lots of things. Okay. So, reaction to the wheel. Okay, I'll give you a minute or two more. I think we've had a few more than that so far in terms of contributors. Okay, not so sure overall. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so what do you like about it, or what could we do to improve? I don't think we were intending that staff need to give more in order to achieve wellbeing. I don't think that was the intention, so that's not clear. And in terms of responsibility, I think what we're saying is that only individuals can be really responsible for their own well-being, but that there's a responsibility on the employer, but also as the community as a whole to be a conducive environment. So we've tried to set out that balance. And then your point about work-life balance is absolutely a good one. Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Yeah, kindness. Okay. Work-life balance is there. I think we had a bit of that in the statement phrases, but let's think about that some more. Okay. Any thoughts about what we could do, particularly with the offer and the services? Cheaper sport, parking options? Okay. Just as a reminder, those are the services that we've got at the moment. Okay. Okay, and then in terms of the next phase, we're in conversation with the World Change in Glasgow team, so the transformation team, to develop a wellbeing portal, so an area of the website that will be a kind of a one-stop shop for access to all things health and wellbeing resources and offers and services. And we would hope, we started the kind of user engagement in December, and the intention is to launch something around the end of April. So is that a good idea? We've had general support for that overall. And then two suggestions. One is an area that colleagues can go to access offers, services or things. Also that managers can use as somewhere that they can seek help for colleagues or for themselves, but also to kind of direct people if they're looking for something particular. Great. Okay, thank you for your feedback there. And then I've got a final question. What else would help you better manage your wellbeing? Secure contract. Yeah, okay, manageable workload. Kirsten, I'm going to say a little bit about workload, and I don't know if you want to come in as well. I think it's fair to say that in the working group, we had a number of weeks where we talked about workload and tried to get a handle on how we could address that issue, what we could do around that issue, and actually could we do anything if there was an issue around workload. And I think we discussed it at length. I think workload is a really serious issue that's got to be dealt with. Whether or not I think this strategy can do that, I don't think it can. I think workload has got to be addressed in the line management and as part of the management conversation. But that has been strongly noted in the strategy paper and will be fed back to our SMG colleagues. So I think it's important that we're managing workload and that we're addressing that issue. But that's far from me saying that this strategy does that directly. Kirsten, is there anything you want to say about workload in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we had those conversations about, you know, could we encourage a kind of time in the week where a kind of that would be devoted for people to just do stuff that was good for their well-being, like go on a walk or have kind of, you know, yoga classes or whatever on. And then I think there was a feeling then that people just felt, well, you know, we wouldn't want to be obliged to do that, because then we would just be probably thinking about all the work that we would then have to do later to catch up on taking time out. So, you know, we don't want to be kind of just setting an extra pressure to take well-being time that then just adds as another thing that we're all expected to do, but somehow be able to you know, encourage I guess it's just about, like, I mean, as you say, I think it's really, really challenging, and there's kind of really big macro issues here in the way to do with, you know, the way that universities operate, but there probably are things that can be done at my line management level, just open and honest conversations and discussions about what could be dropped, you know, what could be done differently, what could be actually, you know, what could be delegated, those kind of conversations that need to go on, that maybe, yeah. I mean, there's a comment here from John saying, you know, time wasted on bureaucracy, and I think that's something that I feel quite strongly about. That does feel like something that the institution could be doing, to be reviewing all our processes and always looking for ways to slim them down. So I think that is probably one of the big things that we could be doing as an organisational level that would probably really help.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And I see a whole range of points there about training, about resources, about workload, security, salaries, you know, limiting the number of online meetings, all of these sorts of things, and empowering teams and leaders to lead on that basis. Okay. Right, I'm going to stop sharing. If you have time and you would like to, I'm happy to have a more traditional conversation and see if there's any other points or questions people would like to make in the more outside of the Menti.
So I thought that was very interesting. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is an awful lot of people don't really trust their colleagues, and therefore because you want to be part of the meeting, you're not really willing to trust your colleague to do what's necessary in that meeting on your group behalf. And so if we could do a picture of more delegating responsibility appropriately, trusting colleagues to deliver, not constantly checking up on them. You know, and it's difficult to get that balance of allowing people enough rope, but not too much. But if we could work on that, then that would create huge efficiencies. And, you know, my heart leaps with joy when I have a 2-hour meeting cancelled on the morning, as I have later this afternoon. I think, oh, all that time I've now got to do something else. So, you know, if we could think a little bit more like that, how do we shrink the number of people who are required for a meeting and get people to gate and trust?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think you made a point about bureaucracy in the chat as well, John. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as we develop this strategy further, I know Kirsten's been really keen to think about how can we engage the transformation team to be having a kind of a focus on things that frustrate and have an impact on colleague well-being, as part of the improvement journey, and just thinking about those as benefits as well as, it took 2 days out of a process and saved, I don't know, £10,000. I think these are the sorts of things that we can just be more thoughtful about. I do think that the wellbeing agenda is quite a lot about balance. So the balance between my personal responsibility for my own health and my own well-being versus the community's responsibility to support and enable me, and for my employer to be reasonable and to not overburden me, etc. So I do think there's an element of balance here. So I guess any point you make about what teams can do could easily be negatively countered with, yes, but what about leadership? And I think actually the answer is we've all got to play a role. So there's lots of great ideas about having Zoom-free afternoons or cutting out the number of meetings we have. And I guess it's always a question about how much control have we got over that within our own teams.
But that's culture.
It is, yeah.
So so the culture of and we've got some people who just have to be at every meeting, and they get really stressed out because the number of meetings has gone way up with now we've had COVID and Zoom, because it's just so easy to meet. So I would say I have 3 times the amount of time in meetings now than I had 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's no, there used to be, at least before, you would get up and walk between one meeting and the next. And now quite often.
Now you're lucky if you make it to the loo.
Yes.
Is there any other thoughts? There's some interesting comments in the chat around team norms. Absolutely. One of the teams that we have taken this presentation to actually is the commercial services leadership team. And what's really interesting is that they had decided as a leadership team some time ago that they would rarely, and only if absolutely essential, have meetings between 12 and 2. And they also all signed up to various health challenges such as running or walking steps, etc. And they weren't connected, those things, but they found that they've just set a different way of working, and they just do that as much as they possibly can. And they did that as a team, and that seems to work for them, and there'll be other things that will work for other teams.
Elise, we've got a couple of hands up. We've got Emma McIntosh and then Leah.
Hi there. Yeah, just really interesting listening to the presentation. Thanks very much for putting this together. I think it's really important. I think what John Cleland was just saying really resonated with me, and I'm just thinking about whether this is a bit like the elephant in the room at the moment, is that we're all stuck to Zoom, and we've had these huge increases in numbers of meetings, which is probably why a lot of us haven't gone back to work, because we're tied to the Wi-Fi and the Zoom setup that we've all got. And I do think this is the urgency just now around how we move out of this situation. It's really quite hard to think about having a strategy for well-being where we're in this kind of immediacy of sort of stress levels, if you like, with regards to the number of extra meetings that many of us have. And also the fact that, as a line manager and somebody who's line managed, I think that we have all these different sort of external projects, if you like, so they don't all feed through one line manager. So you're kind of dealing with so many different parties. It's really difficult to kind of have a strategy where you can actually change a lot of your, apart from being really proactive and really kind of defiant about not going to meetings, what have you. So I think there's a lot of those kind of softer things we probably need to be thinking about with regards to well-being.
Yeah, and if this strategy does anything, I would hope it starts people thinking about what can be done, and also encourages teams and leaders in particular to be thinking about some of these issues. One of the next things that we'll see after the strategy launch is we're looking at how we can include a wellbeing conversation in the PNDR process. So a kind of a check-in point, and I think that just gives people the opportunity to think about what could help me, what would make a difference for me, what can support our team. Yeah, thanks, Emma. Leah?
Yeah, thanks so much. I just wanted to pick up on the point of bureaucracy and the processes, and thinking about every so often we get asked about these time allocation surveys to fill out. And I may have missed it, but I've never seen a summary, for instance, for IHW. What have people said in their time allocation surveys? How much are they spending on different processes? And could that evidence not feed back into some of these discussions in terms of resources and changing some of the processes?
Yeah, I think
that I may have missed seeing this, but I've never seen a summary of these time allocation surveys, either at the university level or at the institute level.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. There's probably somebody on this call responsible for that within IHW sitting there thinking, oh, this is actually what we, oh.
So the time allocation survey is nothing to do with IHW or anywhere else. It's an exercise for the centre. And when it was initially started many years ago, we were told that they wanted to know everyone's donated time so that they would then realise at the centre how many more staff they needed and would start to sort of hire more staff. And none of that ever happened. It was used partly to fill into the full economic costing model. And I've asked several times since then what happens to that data, and who knows? It seems to be a university black hole. And if anyone could work it out where it goes and what the value is to all of us, it would be really nice to know.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm very cynical about it, even though I do it.
But it's a very
I thought that would be the answer.
Yeah, it's a very good bad example of time and pressures for not an immediate value. Now, I'm assuming somebody, being somebody at the centre who's in this, I am the centre. So, there's lots of criticism of the centre, and I think, well, actually, we need X, Y, and Z to do A, B, and C. Hopefully, we explain it fairly well, or as well as we can. But yeah, I think that's a very good point, Kate, and you should keep asking that question.
I mean, there is a point that many of us, perhaps most of us, are vocational academics, and therefore this idea of a 9-to-5 working day is just weird. So I was just wondering, I don't really get a realization that the university thinks that people work at weekends and evenings and all sorts of things, which is what most of us do most of the time. And that this idea that you only work 40 hours a week is just fabulous in the old sense of the term.
But we're only paid for 35, which feels quite out of sync with what actually goes on. It's 60, 70 hours is a normal working week for me, and I'm only working 80% of full time, supposedly.
I can completely agree. So I joined the university just 1 month ago, and before that I was 3 years freelancing. So I used to work as much as I want, and consequently my earning is also depends on how much I work. And it would be I read about other very new systems. I think it was Scandinavian country. I think it is Finland, not sure, Finland or Sweden. But anyway, that there is more tendency of working less, like 4 days a week. And I remember also in my first job, it was in Austria, people who used to work part-time were actually more productive. This means if I work like 5 hours a day instead of 8 hours, in these 5 hours, I am more productive than the 8 hours. It would be nice if there is some kind of flexibility in the system that allows people, I don't know, very proactive people somehow to work as much as they want, but also somehow there would be some flexibility that sometimes in some months one tends to work less, sometimes one tends to work more. This kind of flexibility would be great, actually.
Does anybody feel like they have that flexibility?
Well, I have a fixed term contract with 35 hours a day. I usually have my stopwatch beside me, so I'm trying to be accurate as much as I can. And I tend to work early morning and the weekend so that I fulfill 35 hours. And afterwards, I see that there are still some duties that I need to accomplish so that my colleagues are not waiting for me. So no, at the moment I don't have such flexibility because the contract is very clear. It's 35 hours a week. Yeah, a week.
Yeah, I take the point. You're contracted for hours, not outputs. Yeah. Okay.
We've had an interesting comment from Harry. I don't know, Harry, if you would like to kind of speak to that comment, but about just voting on what staff members would want in terms of wellbeing strategy. I don't know whether you were thinking of within the context of this wellbeing strategy or actually just locally, whether you know, there should be more of that kind of interactions maybe between you know, within our research groups or teams or whatever, that people could kind of have a bit more of discussion and voting, you know, at a local level. Okay, so you can't, you're not able to switch your mic on. That's okay, not to worry. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in then on that point about, you know, do people feel in general at local level that they have that opportunity to contribute to those discussions, and do people feel kind of listened to in general about when they raise issues around flexibility and well-being? If anyone wanted to come back on that. Oh,
I definitely think I've recently just moved to a new unit and under working with a new team, and my line manager, I hadn't realised I'd never been line managed before until now, and for the last 2 years I've got a fantastic line manager now in the team that I work with, whereas for the past 18 years at the university, line manager was terrible. So I definitely do think flexibility and everything else round about it, regardless of what the strategy is within the university wider, I definitely think it does depend. And I made the comment about team norms earlier, team norms and your own line manager at that very local level, which then defines your flexibility, for sure. I definitely think so. And I don't even know if, unless staff is willing to, you know, tap into an official strategy or whatever, if flexibility isn't happening, whether it is line managerial or David's put a very good comment there about his obviously childcare commitments. But I know I didn't have as much flexibility as I would have, as I needed at my last post, and it was down to childcare and things, and it's because my line manager had no clue. I mean, she wanted me to leave my 9-year-old at home on her own, you know, because she thought that it was me that needed my 9-year-old more than my 9-year-old needed me, you know, and it was just that complete lack of understanding of what those extra pressures really mean, you know. And so I do think it's definitely dependent on the understanding of your line manager at a local level as to whether flexibility, you know, and if you're contracted to 35 hours a week, as long as, you know, if that's directly related to outputs, as long as, you know, you're doing your outputs and perhaps you are putting in the hours, does it matter when you do, when you fit that in? Unless obviously you have to, you know, you have to meet, or you've got a deadline for a Friday or whatever. But surely, you know, it shouldn't matter when you do it. Surely that just makes sense to me. That, yeah.
When I joined the university 3 years ago from the public sector, having previously worked in financial services, I was really shocked by how rigid the culture was around flexibility. And whilst there's an assumption that academics can flex around and do that, certainly with some of the academic roles, there was absolutely very, very limited flexibility, and I was shocked by that. The organisation's come further in 2 years because it's had to than I think I would ever have expected it to. One of the first pieces of work I did was the flexible working policy rewrite, which was so far ahead of where we were as an organisation that by the time we launched it, we were into the pandemic, and actually it wasn't that far ahead. So I don't know if any of you have had a chance to look at any of the hybrid working or the enabling new ways of working people first view. The idea is the organisation has had to totally unlock in terms of the way it works over the last 2 years, because we just had to, and it shouldn't just go back exactly the way it was. So actually I think there's a real opportunity for us now to work differently, and to have quite a lot of degree of control at a local and individual level about how we do that. So I think we wouldn't really have had a policy position before that supported if you are meeting your outputs and you're generally, you know, putting in the level of commitment we'd expect, and your quality of output is good, you know, why do I need, you know, and you're also contributing to the team in your community of work, then why do I need to know where you are at what time of the day? I don't think that would have been possible for us before, whereas now I think that's very much part of our new approach to hybrid working. So it's yet another way that we can hopefully begin to support wellbeing, because that flexibility, both in terms of where and when I work, but also how I work and the way in which I structure my outputs, is a significant factor both in engagement but also in performance, and all of that contributes to wellbeing. I'm conscious of your time, and I'm really happy to continue for a few more minutes, or if you've got more things you want to talk about. But I'm also conscious that some of you might want to start dropping off soon.
There's just one comment come in from Jane about the reward and recognition awards, that there is this implicit, I think anyone who's tried to get reward and for reward and recognition, but also I think for promotion, you always get this sense that whatever you've done is never quite enough. And yes, I think this is a really important point, that we should be able to just feel that we are paid to do our job consistently well, and not be always. I think there is this sort of underlying tone to quite a lot of the reward and recognition and the promotion, that, you know, that there is this expectation of always going above and beyond, and actually people just doing their job, as we've discussed, is often taking them well over their 35 hours. So to be feeling like in order to be rewarded you need to be doing even more than that, I think is probably underlying an erosion of people's well-being as well. So I think that's a really important point. Thanks, Jane. I feel as a well-being meeting, it would be probably good practice to finish with 15 minutes before the hour, so that people can get up and make a cup of tea and have a break before the next meeting. But thank you very much, Elise, for all the work that went into this, and thank you everyone for really great discussion and lots of really interesting important points that we'll be able to take forward and put into the next iteration.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very much appreciated your frankness and your honesty as well. We are not in a perfect situation, but hopefully we can move forward in a positive intent. So thanks very much for your time. As I said at the beginning, if you have any further reflections or points you'd like to make, I'd be happy to hear them. Just drop me a note or get in touch in all the usual ways. Okay, thanks very much for your time. Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.